"Marry me and I'll help you raise your daughters," said the millionaire woman to the single dad. His response surprised her. The rain hammered against the coffee shop windows as David Reynolds stared at his phone screen, watching his bank balance drop below $200. Again, his weathered hands, calloused from years of construction work before the accident, trembled slightly as he calculated how many days he could stretch what remained. 3 weeks until his disability check arrived, and groceries for two growing girls didn't come cheap. "Daddy, can we get the chocolate muffin?" 8-year-old Olivia pressed her nose against the display case, her breath fogging the glass. Beside her, 6-year-old Emma tugged at his worn jacket sleeve, pointing at the colorful pastries with the wonder only children possessed. David's heart clenched. They'd been surviving on generic cereal and peanut butter sandwiches for days. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," he whispered, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "Sir," a crisp, professional voice cut through his internal struggle. David looked up to find an elegant woman in an expensive charcoal suit standing beside their table. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her blue eyes held an intensity that made him straighten instinctively. "I'm Eleanor Harrington. I couldn't help but notice you and your daughters." David's protective instincts flared. "We're fine, thank you," he said curtly, pulling the girls closer. Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't condescending. It was understanding. "I don't mean to intrude. I'm actually here because of you, Mr. Reynolds. I've been looking for you." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "Looking for me? Lady, I don't know who you are, but you're David Reynolds, 34 years old, former construction foreman, two daughters, Olivia and Emma. You've been out of work for 8 months since your accident at the Morrison site." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, but not cruel. "You're 3 months behind on rent, and you've been selling your belongings to keep food on the table." David's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "How do you know that?" Eleanor glanced at the girls who were listening with wide eyes, then back at David. "Because I make it my business to know about people who matter. And Mr. Reynolds, you matter very much indeed." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a tablet, showing him a photograph that made his blood freeze. It was him, 20 years younger in military fatigues, standing beside a burning vehicle in Afghanistan. Beside him stood a young woman soldier, her face partially obscured by smoke. "Operation Enduring Freedom, 2019, Forward Operating Base Chapman. You saved my daughter's life that day, Mr. Reynolds." The tablet slipped from David's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the wooden table. His mind reeled back to that scorching day in Afghanistan. The IED explosion, the screaming metal, the young soldier trapped beneath the burning Humvee. He remembered pulling her free, his hands blistering from the superheated metal, the smell of smoke and diesel fuel choking his lungs. "Sarah Morrison," he whispered, the name coming back like a ghost from his past. "She lived, thanks to you." Eleanor's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing raw emotion beneath her polished exterior. "She made it home, Mr. Reynolds. She had a beautiful life, got married, started a family. She died 3 years ago in a car accident, but she lived because of what you did that day." David felt the walls of the coffee shop closing in around him. Olivia and Emma sat silent, sensing the weight of the adult conversation swirling above their heads. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Before Sarah died, she made me promise something. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find the man who gave her the chance to live. She wanted me to make sure he was taken care of the way he took care of her." "I don't understand," David managed, his voice hoarse. "You're her mother?" "I'm her stepmother, but I raised her from the time she was 12. Sarah was everything to me." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "When she passed, I lost my only child, but she left me with a mission, and Eleanor Harrington always completes her missions. Sarah told me about that day, about how you didn't hesitate, didn't think about your own safety. She said you pulled her out and then went back for 2 others while the ammunition was cooking off in that vehicle. She never forgot your face, your name, or what you did." David rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. "That's what any soldier would have done." "No, Mr. Reynolds, that's what a hero does. And heroes shouldn't be sitting in coffee shops counting change while their children go hungry." Eleanor straightened, her businesswoman demeanor returning. Which brings me to why I'm here. She produced an elegant envelope sealed with what looked like real wax. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Reynolds, one that could change everything for you and your daughters. What kind of proposition? Eleanor's lips curved into a smile that was equal parts mysterious and determined. Something that will sound absolutely insane, Mr. Reynolds, but I believe it might be the answer both of us have been searching for. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harrington Industries executive suite. Eleanor Harrington stood watching Seattle come alive beneath her. At 62, she commanded a view that matched her position, lofty, expansive, and carefully curated. Her reflection revealed a woman of striking elegance. Silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, tailored navy suit that whispered of old money. The fine lines around her eyes spoke of a life fully lived, though the slight downturn of her mouth hinted at recent sorrows. "The Henderson proposal needs your signature by noon," Mrs. Patterson said, materializing beside her desk with silent efficiency. Eleanor nodded without turning. "And the board members?" "All confirmed for the 4 o'clock meeting. Thomas Blackwood requested a private meeting beforehand." A slight tightening around Eleanor's eyes was the only indication of her displeasure. "Denied. If Thomas has something to say, he can say it in front of the entire board." Mrs. Patterson made a note on her tablet. "He mentioned it was regarding the Morrison Foundation gala." "That's a curious coincidence," Eleanor murmured. "The Morrison name seems to be following me lately." The spacious office reflected Eleanor's taste: rich mahogany furniture, leather seating, and walls adorned with awards and photographs charting the rise of Harrington Industries from a modest consulting firm to a construction and real estate empire. One wall, however, was different. Family photographs dominated, mostly of a beautiful young woman with Eleanor's determined blue eyes, but dark hair and a wide smile that Eleanor herself rarely displayed anymore. "Will you be attending the charity luncheon today?" Mrs. Patterson asked, following Eleanor's gaze. "Cancel it," Eleanor said. "I have a more important matter to attend to." Left alone, Eleanor opened her desk drawer and removed a thick file labeled Reynolds, David A. Inside were photographs, medical records, financial statements, and a detailed psychological evaluation. The thoroughness of the dossier spoke of resources few private citizens could command. Her fingers traced a photograph of David Reynolds and his daughters at a school function from last year, before the accident that had derailed his career. They looked happy, though Eleanor's trained eye could detect the shadows of grief that still lingered 3 years after his wife's death. The intercom buzzed. "Dr. Morgan is here to see you." Eleanor quickly closed the file. "Send him in." Dr. Richard Morgan entered with the unhurried confidence of a man who had known Eleanor long enough to be unintimidated by her power. At 78, he moved with the careful deliberation of age, but his mind remained razor-sharp. He had been Eleanor's mentor when she first entered business, and now served as one of the few people who spoke to her with complete candor. "You're avoiding my calls, Eleanor," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk, "which means you're planning something reckless." "It's good to see you too, Richard." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Would you like coffee?" "I'd like an explanation. The board tells me you've been distracted, canceling meetings, disappearing for hours. That's not the Eleanor Harrington I know." Eleanor's gaze flicked momentarily to the photographs of Sarah. "Perhaps the Eleanor Harrington you know changed 3 years ago, and you're only now noticing." Dr. Morgan followed her gaze, his expression softening. "Sarah wouldn't want you living like this, Eleanor, working yourself to exhaustion, keeping everyone at arm's length. Don't presume to tell me what my daughter would want." The steel in her voice could have cut demon. "She made her wishes quite clear before she died." "Ah." De Morgan nodded slowly. "This is about the soldier, isn't it? You found him." Eleanor's silence was confirmation enough. "And what do you intend to do now that you've found him?" When Eleanor didn't immediately answer, Dr. Morgan leaned forward. "Eleanor, please tell me you're not planning something dramatic." She met his gaze directly. "I'm planning to keep a promise to my daughter. There are many ways to help a man without upending your life. A buspo, financial assistance. He wouldn't accept charity. I've studied him extensively. David Reynolds has too much pride for handouts, even in his current situation." "So what then?" Eleanor rose and walked back to the window, her back straight as a blade. "I'm going to offer him a business proposition, A mutually beneficial arrangement that solves both our problems. And what problem do you have that a struggling construction worker can solve? She turned, real emotions shimmering in her eyes. Loneliness, Richard. The kind that comes from having 6 houses and no one to come home to. The kind that comes from having more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But no one to leave it to. Dr. Morgan's expression grew troubled. Eleanor, whatever you're planning, I've made up my mind. Her voice was quiet but immovable. I owe Sarah this. I owe myself this chance. The apartment complex where David Reynolds lived with his daughters sat in a neighborhood sliding toward neglect. Paint peeled from railings, half the hallway lights were burned out, and a smell of mildew permeated the stairwell. Inside Unit 307, however, a different atmosphere prevailed. Despite the worn furniture and patched walls, someone had worked hard to create a home. Children's artwork brightened the refrigerator door. Bookshelves made from cinder blocks and boards held well-read paperbacks. A small upright piano, clearly second-hand but carefully maintained, stood against one wall. David winced as he lowered himself onto the couch, his back protesting after a morning spent fixing Mrs. Gonzalez's sink 2 floors down. The doctors had been clear after the accident. No more heavy construction work, possibly ever. The steel beam that had fallen during the Morrison building collapse had crushed 2 vertebrae. He was lucky to be walking at all. Lucky, David muttered the word like a curse as he sorted through the stack of bills on the coffee table. Eviction notice, final warning on the electricity, past due medical bills. Some luck. The front door opened with a familiar squeak, followed by the sound of children's voices and a deeper male rumble. Hey man, special delivery, Jake Simmons called out, ushering Olivia and Emma inside. Jake, a fellow veteran who worked as a security guard, had become David's lifeline since the accident, helping with childcare when David's back was too painful for him to manage alone. Emma raced to the couch, wrapping her arms around David's neck. Daddy, Ms. Wilson said my drawing was the best in class. David hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the cheap kind that came in a 3-in-1 bottle, but which she insisted was just like Mommy's. That's wonderful, Pumpkin. Where is it? We'll put it right on the fridge. Olivia approached more sedately, the premature seriousness of a child who had shouldered adult worries too early. At 8, she already monitored her father's pain levels and tried to hide her awareness of their financial troubles. How was your back today, Dad? She asked, her eyes scanning his face for signs he might try to conceal. Better, David lied, forcing a smile. How was piano practice at school? Olivia brightened slightly. Good. Mrs. Lee says I'm learning fast. She let me stay during lunch to practice. David felt the familiar mixture of pride and guilt. Olivia had inherited her mother's musical talent, but they couldn't afford proper lessons. The school's ancient piano and occasional YouTube tutorials were all he could provide. Jake set the girls' backpacks by the door and gave David a meaningful look. Girls, why don't you go wash up? I need to talk to your dad for a minute. Once they were out of earshot, Jake lowered his voice. Morales called me. Said he saw you meeting with some fancy lady at the coffee shop this morning. David sighed. In their neighborhood, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. It was nothing. Didn't sound like nothing. Rich older woman, expensive suit, private car waiting outside. What's going on, man? David hesitated, then retrieved Eleanor Harrington's business card from his pocket. Remember Sarah Morrison? From the Chapman deployment? Jake's eyes widened. The lieutenant we pulled out of that burning Humvee? What about her? That fancy lady was her stepmother. Sarah died 3 years ago in a car accident. Damn. Jake ran a hand through his cropped hair. That's rough. But what's it got to do with you now? David explained the encounter, watching Jake's expression shift from concern to disbelief. She wants to what? Jake finally interrupted. Marry you, as in legally married? This has got to be some kind of scam. I thought so too at first. David toyed with the business card. But she knew things, Jake. Details about that day that weren't in any report. And she had pictures of Sarah that no scammer could have accessed. So what? She's legit. That doesn't mean her offer is. Rich people are different, man. They think they can buy and sell lives like stocks. From the bathroom came the sound of the girls laughing. A sound too rare these days. David closed his eyes briefly, remembering the envelope Eleanor had pressed into his hands before leaving. Inside had been 5 crisp $100 bills and a handwritten note. For the girls, no strings attached. Call me when you're ready to discuss the future. I'm meeting her tomorrow, David said quietly. At her office. Jake stared at him. You're actually considering this crazy proposition? I'm considering hearing her out. David gestured at the pile of bills. What choice do I have? Another month and we're on the street. My disability appeal was denied again. I've applied for every job I'm physically capable of doing and gotten nowhere. There are other options. My cousin in Portland has that construction office job opening up. I can't uproot the girls again. They've lost enough already. David's voice caught. After Rebecca died, I promised them stability. Jake's expression softened. I get it, man. But marriage? To a complete stranger? David looked toward the kitchen where Olivia was helping Emma set the table, using the mismatched plates and chipped glasses that remained after David had sold most of their better possessions. I'm not saying yes, he said finally. I'm just saying I'll listen. Later that night, after the girls were asleep in their shared bedroom, David sat on the edge of his pull-out couch staring at his phone. Eleanor Harrington's number glowed on the screen, but he hadn't yet pressed call. Instead, he opened the drawer of the side table and removed a worn leather journal, Rebecca's journal, which he'd kept since her death from cancer 4 years ago. He turned to a page he'd marked, reading his late wife's handwriting through suddenly blurry eyes. If anything happens to me, I want David to find happiness again. He deserves someone who sees his strength, his goodness. The girls need a mother who will love them as fiercely as I do. Promise me you won't shut that door, David. Promise you'll keep your heart open. David closed the journal and picked up his phone again. His thumb hovered over Eleanor's number for another long moment before he finally pressed call. It rang only once before she answered, as if she'd been waiting. Perhaps she had been. Mr. Reynolds, Eleanor's voice was calm, unsurprised. I was hoping to hear from you. I'll meet you tomorrow, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. I understand. A pause then. Bring the girls. They should be part of this conversation from the beginning. Eleanor led them to her car, a pristine black Mercedes that probably cost more than David had earned in his best year. As they drove through downtown Seattle's gleaming towers, David watched his daughters press their faces to the tinted windows, marveling at the city from this new perspective. Where are we going? David asked, noting how Eleanor handled the luxury vehicle with casual expertise. My office. We need privacy for this conversation. And frankly, Mr. Reynolds, you need to see who I am before you can understand what I'm offering. 20 minutes later, they stood in the marble lobby of Harrington Industries, a 40-story tower that pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass needle. David had driven past this building 1,000 times during his construction days, never imagining he'd walk through its doors. The elevator climbed silently to the 38th floor, where Eleanor's corner office offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. The space was elegant, but not ostentatious. Rich wood, leather furniture, and photographs that told a story of a life lived at the highest levels of business and society. Daddy, look, Emma pointed to a wall of framed awards and certificates. She has so many prizes. Eleanor smiled genuinely for the first time since they'd met. Those are for boring, grown-up work, sweetheart. Would you girls like some juice and cookies while your father and I talk? While Mrs. Patterson settled Olivia and Emma in a nearby conference room with snacks and coloring books, Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee from an expensive-looking machine. Mr. Reynolds, I'm 62 years old. I built this company from nothing after my first husband died young. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Traveled the world, owned houses in 6 countries. She handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. But for all my success, I failed at the one thing that mattered most. David waited, sensing she needed to tell this story her way. I was never able to have children of my own. When I married Sarah's father, she became my world. I threw myself into being her mother with the same intensity I brought to business. I thought I had forever with her. Eleanor's voice caught. When she died, I realized that all my wealth, all my power meant nothing. I had no family, no legacy except corporate profits and empty houses. Through the glass wall, David could see his daughters laughing with Mrs. Patterson, their faces bright with genuine joy he hadn't seen in months. I've spent the last 3 years searching for purpose, Mr. Reynolds. I've donated millions to charity, funded scholarships, built hospitals, but none of it filled the void Sarah left behind. Eleanor moved to her desk, picking up a silver-framed photograph of a beautiful young woman in army fatigues. Then I remembered her final request. Find David Reynolds. Take care of him. David set down his coffee cup with trembling hands. Mrs. Harrington, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but let me finish. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I investigated you thoroughly, Mr. Reynolds. I know about your wife's death 4 years ago, about how you've raised those girls alone while battling your own grief. I know about the construction accident that damaged your back and ended your career. I know you've applied for over 200 jobs and been turned down because of your disability. The words hit David like physical blows. Having his struggles laid out so clinically made him feel exposed, vulnerable. I also know, Eleanor continued, her voice softening, that despite everything you've endured, you've never once complained or given up. Those girls adore you, and you've somehow kept them happy and hopeful, even while your world was falling apart. That takes a special kind of strength, Mr. Reynolds. She moved closer, her blue eyes intense with purpose. I have money, but no family. You have family, but no money. I have houses that echo with emptiness. You have love that could fill any space. Eleanor took a deep breath. So here's my proposition. David, marry me, and I'll help you raise those beautiful daughters. The silence that followed Eleanor's proposal stretched between them like a taut wire. David felt as though the air had been sucked from the room, leaving him gasping for breath. Through the glass wall, he could see Olivia showing Mrs. Patterson one of her drawings, her face animated with the kind of pure joy he'd been unable to give her lately. You can't be serious, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's expression remained steady, businesslike, despite the magnitude of what she'd just suggested. I'm completely serious, Mr. Reynolds. I don't make proposals lightly, whether they're business or personal. David stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Far below, people moved like ants through their daily lives, unaware that 40 stories above them, his entire world was being turned upside down. You don't even know me. This is insane. I know more about you than you might think. Eleanor's voice remained calm, measured. I know you haven't dated anyone since your wife died because you've been too focused on being both mother and father to your girls. I know you lie awake at night worrying about their future. I know you sold your wedding ring last month to pay for Emma's medicine when she had that ear infection. David's hand instinctively went to his bare ring finger. The loss of that simple gold band had felt like losing a Rebecca all over again. How could you possibly know that? Because I make it my business to understand the people I'm investing in. And make no mistake, Mr. Reynolds, this is an investment in you and those girls and in something neither of us has had in a long time. Which is what? Family. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. David thought of the empty apartment waiting for them, the stack of overdue bills hidden in his bedside drawer, the growing desperation in his daughter's eyes when they thought he wasn't looking. This isn't how people get married, he said weakly. This is a business transaction. Eleanor nodded. Yes, it is at first. But David, may I call you David? The best partnerships often start with practical foundations. My first marriage began as a merger of families in Hong Kong. We learned to love each other over time, and we were happy for 15 years until cancer took him. She turned to face him fully, her blue eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. I'm not asking you to love me, David. I'm not even asking you to sleep with me, if that's what you're worried about. I'm proposing a partnership, a way for both of us to get what we need most. And what do you need most? Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, revealing the loneliness she'd been hiding beneath her professional exterior. I need to be needed again. I need to hear children's laughter in my house. I need someone to care whether I come home at night. Her voice dropped to barely audible. I need to not die alone in some sterile hospital room with only lawyers and employees around my bedside. David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared pain. Wasn't this what Rebecca had meant about keeping his heart open? Not just to romantic love, but to all forms of connection. I know it sounds cold, calculating, Eleanor continued, but consider this, your daughters would want for nothing. The best schools, college funds, opportunities you could never provide alone. You'd have financial security, excellent medical care for your back injury, and the chance to be the father you want to be. Through the glass, Emma looked up and waved at them, her gap-toothed smile bright enough to power the city below. David waved back automatically, his mind reeling with possibilities. What would you get out of it? He asked. Eleanor smiled sadly. I'd get to be a grandmother to two little girls who need one. I'd get to help raise Sarah's legacy, the children of the man who saved her life. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, I'd get to discover that there's more than one way to build a family. Um, that evening, Thomas Blackwood waited in the underground parking garage of Harrington Industries, leaning against his Jaguar with practiced casualness. At 46, he cultivated the image of the eternal bachelor, designer suits, carefully maintained physique, and the predatory charm that had served him well in business and personal conquests alike. When Eleanor approached her car, he straightened, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Eleanor, you've been avoiding me. She didn't break stride. I've been busy, Thomas, as I'm sure you have been, investigating my personal affairs. His smile faltered slightly. I have no idea what you're talking about. The man watching Mr. Reynolds and his daughters at the coffee shop this morning, did you think I wouldn't notice him? Subtlety was never your strong suit. Thomas moved to block her path to the driver's door. The board is concerned, Eleanor. Strange meetings with unknown men, canceling important appointments. It's not like you. The board? Eleanor's laugh was sharp. Or just you, Thomas, worried that my personal life might somehow interfere with your plans to edge me out as CEO? I'm hurt that you would think so cynically of me. His tone suggested anything but hurt. I'm merely concerned about your well-being. Since Sarah's death, don't, Eleanor's voice cut like a blade. Don't you dare use my daughter's name to manipulate me. Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. No manipulation intended, but you must admit, your behavior lately has been erratic. First the Morrison Foundation donations. Now this interest in some disabled construction worker. People are talking. Let them talk. Eleanor unlocked her car. Now, if you'll excuse me. As she moved to open the door, Thomas placed his hand over hers, a seemingly gentle gesture that nonetheless prevented her from pulling away. Who is he, Eleanor? What's so special about David Reynolds that he warrants the personal attention of Eleanor Harrington? Eleanor met his gaze directly. Remove your hand, Thomas. Something in her tone made him comply immediately. Eleanor slid into the driver's seat and started the engine before responding. What's special about David Reynolds is none of your concern, but I suggest you focus your energy on preparing for next quarter's projections rather than spying on me. Your numbers for the Westlake project were disappointingly optimistic. The subtle reminder of his recent failure made Thomas's jaw tighten. This isn't over, Eleanor. On that, we agree. She closed the car door and drove away, leaving Thomas staring after her, his expression calculating. Inside her car, Eleanor's composed facade cracked slightly. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, taking several deep breaths to steady herself. Thomas's interest in David was an unexpected complication, one she should have anticipated. Thomas had been gunning for her position for years, waiting for any sign of weakness or distraction. And now she had provided him with exactly that. As she drove toward her Tudor-style home in the Queen Anne district, Eleanor's mind raced through contingency plans. If David accepted her proposal, she would need to move quickly, establish the narrative before Thomas could twist it to his advantage. If David refused, well, she would cross that bridge if necessary. When she arrived home, Eleanor moved through the quiet rooms with a sense of purpose. She paused in what had once been Sarah's bedroom, now converted to a home office. The walls still held photographs of Sarah at various ages, graduating high school in her army uniform, on her wedding day. A life cut short, but a life fully lived. What would you think of all this, Sarah? Eleanor whispered to the empty room. Would you approve of how I'm keeping my promise to you? No answer came, of course, But as Eleanor stood there, she felt certain that she was on the right path. David Reynolds had saved Sarah's life once. Perhaps now, in some cosmic balance, Sarah's memory would save his. Eleanor moved to her desk and opened her laptop. There was work to be done if David accepted her proposal. Legal documents to prepare, financial arrangements to make, and most importantly, a strategy to neutralize Thomas Blackwood's inevitable interference. As she worked late into the night, Eleanor felt an anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Sarah's death, she was planning for a future that held more than just business deals and empty achievements. Whether that future would bring joy or heartbreak remained to be seen. But Eleanor Harrington had never shied away from risk when the potential reward was great enough. Eleanor's Tudor-style house wasn't what David had expected. Instead of some cold, minimalist mansion, the home in the Queen Anne district felt warm and inviting, with ivy climbing the brick walls and flower boxes overflowing with late-season blooms. As the black sedan pulled into the circular driveway, Olivia and Emma pressed their faces to the windows in wonder. "Daddy, it looks like a castle," Emma whispered, her eyes wide. The front door opened before they could knock, and Eleanor appeared wearing dark jeans and a soft cream sweater, a far cry from the power suit she'd worn to their first meeting. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and David noticed laugh lines around her eyes that her professional makeup had previously concealed. "Welcome," she said, her smile genuine, as she knelt to the girl's eye level. "I'm so glad you could come. I have something special planned for dinner." The interior of the house was elegant but lived in, with family photos scattered throughout and books filling every available shelf. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the Persian rug where two golden retrievers lay sleeping. "Dogs!" Emma squealed, immediately abandoning any shyness as the retrievers, clearly accustomed to children, approached with wagging tails. "That's Fitzgerald and Gatsby," Eleanor explained, laughing as Emma buried her hands in Fitzgerald's thick coat. They're old gentlemen, very patient with little hands. As the girls played with the peas, Eleanor led David through the house. It was larger than he'd imagined, but not ostentatiously so. 5 bedrooms, each with its own character and charm. She paused outside 2 rooms on the second floor. "I had Mrs. Patterson pick up a few things," Eleanor said, opening the first door to reveal a bedroom decorated in soft purples and whites, with a canopy bed and built-in bookshelves already filled with age-appropriate novels. For Olivia, the second room was painted in cheerful yellow with twin beds and a play area complete with art supplies and educational toys. And for Emma, David stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. The rooms were beautiful, clearly prepared with care and attention to his daughter's ages and interests. "Eleanor, you didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she said simply. "I wanted them to see that this could be their home if you decide to accept my proposal." They continued the tour, ending in Eleanor's home office, a smaller, more personal space than her corporate headquarters. Here the walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. Eleanor with various world leaders, at charity galas, receiving business awards. But David's attention was caught by a section dedicated entirely to Sarah. "She was beautiful," David said, studying a photo of Sarah in her wedding dress. Inside and out, Eleanor's voice carried the weight of maternal love. She would have made an incredible mother. She had this way of making everyone around her feel special, important. "Like her stepmother," David observed. Eleanor looked surprised by the observation. "I hope so. I tried to give her everything I never had: stability, unconditional love, the confidence to pursue her dreams." They were interrupted by laughter from downstairs where the girls had apparently discovered Eleanor's grand piano. The sound of small fingers picking out a simple melody filled the house with life. "Is she taking piano lessons?" Eleanor asked. David shook his head, embarrassed. "We can't afford. Olivia's been teaching herself from library books and YouTube videos. She has a real gift for it." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "I studied piano for 12 years. I'd love to teach her properly if she's interested." They found the girls in the music room where Olivia was carefully pressing keys while Emma danced to the resulting melody. The sight of his daughters in this beautiful space, surrounded by warmth and possibility, made David's throat tighten with emotion. "Dinner's ready," Eleanor announced. "I hope everyone likes spaghetti and meatballs." The meal was comfortable, surprisingly natural. Eleanor asked the girls about school, their friends, their favorite subjects, listening to their answers with genuine interest. She told stories about her travels, about the countries she'd visited, and the cultures she'd experienced, painting vivid pictures that had both girls hanging on her every word. After dinner, while the girls played in the living room, David and Eleanor sat in her study with coffee and the serious conversation they'd been avoiding all evening. Before we discuss terms, Eleanor said, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity, David. This is partnership. I'm not doing this to save you. I'm doing this because we can save each other. David nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood the distinction. If you agree to this arrangement, I have certain expectations. The girls would be legally adopted as my daughters. You would have equal say in all parenting decisions, but I won't be relegated to the role of distant benefactor. I want to be part of their daily lives, helping with homework, attending school events, being present for both the mundane moments and the milestones. And us, David asked, what would our marriage look like? Eleanor considered this carefully. Separate bedrooms, at least initially. No physical expectations unless that changes organically over time. We would present as a united front to the world. Attend social functions together. Be partners in every sense except the romantic one. Unless what? Unless we discover that partnership can grow into something more. I'm not opposed to that possibility, David, but I won't demand it and I won't expect it. From the living room came the sound of Olivia playing a more complex melody on the piano, the notes floating through the house like a preview of what their life here could become. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something I haven't told you about Sarah's death. David tensed, sensing this was important. The accident that killed her, it wasn't random. She was driving to meet me for lunch when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died on the way to the hospital. But before the paramedics arrived, she was conscious. A witness heard her final words. Eleanor's voice broke slightly. She said, tell Eleanor to find David Reynolds. Tell her to keep her promise. Tell her that love comes in many forms. The weight of those words settled over David like a mantle. Sarah, dying on a Seattle street, had been thinking of him, a man she'd known for perhaps an hour 20 years ago, but whose actions had given her the life she was now losing. So you see, Eleanor continued, this isn't just about what I want or what you need. This is about honoring a dying woman's wish, about creating something meaningful from tragedy. David looked toward the living room where his daughters were building a fort with couch cushions under the watchful eyes of two patient golden retrievers. They looked happier than he'd seen them in months, comfortable in this beautiful home with this complex woman who seemed genuinely interested in their well-being. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Eleanor smiled, and David realized it was the first time he'd seen her look truly relieved. Let's start with the wedding, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. 3 weeks later, David stood in front of the full-length mirror in Eleanor's guest bedroom, adjusting his tie for the third time. The simple gray suit Eleanor had insisted on buying him fit perfectly, tailored to accommodate the slight stoop his back injury had left him with. Through the window, he could see the garden where they'd decided to hold the small ceremony, just the girls, Mrs. Patterson as witness, and a judge Eleanor knew personally. A soft knock interrupted his nervous fidgeting. Come in, he called, expecting Eleanor or one of the girls. Instead, Jake entered, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity. He'd driven up from his security job that morning, despite David's assurances that he didn't need to come. So, this is really happening? He said, taking in the elegant bedroom and the wedding attire. David nodded, not trusting his voice. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, gentle integration into Eleanor's world, and countless conversations about boundaries, expectations, and the girls' adjustment. They'd attended family therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Hicks, Eleanor's idea, to ensure they were all processing the dramatic changes healthily. David, are you sure about this? Jake sat on the edge of the king-size bed. I mean, I've met Eleanor and she seems wonderful, but marriage to someone you barely know. I know her better now, David said, though he understood Jake's concern. We've spent every evening together these past weeks. She's good with the girls, Jake, and she's been nothing but honest about what this is and what it isn't. But what happens when one of you wants something different? What if she falls in love with someone else? What if you do? David had asked himself the same questions during sleepless nights in the guest bedroom. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. Right now, this is what's best for everyone involved. Jake stood and hugged him tightly. I just want you to be happy, brother. You've sacrificed so much already. I'm not sacrificing anything, David said, and realized he meant it. I'm gaining a partner, financial security, and the chance to give my daughters everything I couldn't provide alone. That's not sacrifice. That's opportunity. 30 minutes later, David walked through Eleanor's garden toward the small altar they'd set up beneath an arbor of climbing roses. The Seattle autumn had cooperated with a rare sunny day, golden light filtering through the changing leaves. Olivia and Emma walked ahead of him, scattering rose petals and giggling with delight at their important role. Eleanor was already waiting, stunning in a simple ivory dress that complemented her silver hair. She wore Sarah's pearl necklace. She'd shown it to David earlier, explaining that it felt right to have her daughter's blessing represented in some way. As David took his place beside her, Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. No regrets, she whispered. None, he whispered back, surprised to find it was true. Judge Morrison, no relation to the Morrison from David's construction accident, despite the name coincidence, began the simple ceremony. The words washed over David in a blur until they reached the vows they had written together. David, Eleanor said, her voice steady but warm, I promise to be your partner in raising these beautiful girls. I promise to respect the boundaries we've established while remaining open to wherever this journey takes us. I promise to honor the memory of the woman who brought you into this world of fatherhood and to never try to replace her in your heart or theirs. David's throat tightened as he responded with his own carefully chosen words. Eleanor, I promise to be your partner in building the family we both need. I promise to help you heal from the loss of Sarah by creating something beautiful in her honor. I promise to give this marriage, this partnership, my full commitment and respect. When Judge Morrison pronounced them married, Eleanor kissed David's cheek gently, a gesture that felt natural rather than awkward. The girls cheered and ran to embrace them both, and for a moment David could almost believe they had always been a family. The celebration dinner was intimate, just the four of them, plus Mrs. Patterson and Jake. As evening fell and the girls played in the garden with Fitzgerald and Gatsby, David found himself on the back porch with Eleanor, both of them holding glasses of champagne they'd barely touched. So, Eleanor said with a smile, how does it feel to be married to a complete stranger? David laughed, some of the day's tension finally releasing. Like the beginning of something I can't quite define yet. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly how it should feel. If we knew what we were getting into, it wouldn't be much of an adventure, would it? From the garden came Olivia's delighted laughter as she taught Emma a clapping game. Both girls looked healthier already. Better nutrition and the security of knowing they had a permanent home had brought color back to their cheeks and brightness to their eyes. Eleanor, David said quietly, thank you for all of this, for giving them what I couldn't. Thank you, she replied, for giving me what I thought I'd lost forever. The chance to be needed by children who matter. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughters play in the gathering dusk, David realized that love might not be the only foundation for a strong marriage. Sometimes partnership, mutual respect, and shared purpose could be just as powerful. Whether love would grow between them remained to be seen, but for now, this was enough. The wedding night passed quietly, with David in his own room down the hall from Eleanor's. But before he fell asleep, he heard her voice through the baby monitor she'd installed. She was reading bedtime stories to both girls, their voices mingling in the kind of domestic harmony he'd stopped believing was possible. For the first time in years, David fell asleep without worry gnawing at his mind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, new discoveries about this unconventional family they were building. But tonight, everyone he loved was safe, fed, and happy. That was more than enough to build a future on. I don't care what the press release says, Thomas. The board meeting is at 10, not 11. Eleanor's voice carried the crisp authority of someone who had been running a company for decades. She stood in the kitchen of her Tudor home, phone pressed to her ear, while simultaneously checking Olivia's math homework with her free hand. Yes, that's correct. And bring the Morrison projections. The full report, not your edited highlights. She caught Olivia's eye and winked, a small gesture of complicity that made the girl smile. I need to go now. My family is waiting for breakfast. It had been 6 weeks since the wedding, and their morning routine had developed a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor was always up first, making coffee and checking emails before the others stirred. David would come down next, his physical therapy exercises completed, to start breakfast for everyone. The girls would appear last, rumpled and sleepy-eyed, drawn by the smell of pancakes or waffles or whatever their father had decided to make that day. Is Mr. Blackwood being difficult again? Olivia asked as Eleanor set down her phone. At 8 years old, she missed nothing, especially not the slight tightening around Eleanor's eyes whenever Thomas's name was mentioned. Mr. Blackwood is just being Mr. Blackwood, Eleanor replied it diplomatically. Nothing for you to worry about. Did you finish that last problem? Olivia nodded, pushing her notebook across the counter. It was tricky, but I remembered what you showed me about checking my work. Eleanor scanned the page, impressed by the girl's neat handwriting and methodical approach. In just 6 weeks, Olivia had blossomed under the stability and attention that their new arrangement provided. Her grades had improved, her piano playing had advanced dramatically with daily lessons from Eleanor, and the guarded look that had once haunted her eyes was gradually fading. Perfect work, Eleanor praised, just as David entered the kitchen with Emma on his heels. What's perfect? David asked, reaching for the coffee pot. He moved more easily these days. The specialist Eleanor had insisted he see had adjusted his pain medication and prescribed a new physical therapy regimen that was actually helping. Olivia's math homework, Eleanor said. She's quite the mathematician. Takes after her mother, David said, then froze, darting a quick glance at Eleanor. These moments still happen sometimes, references to Rebecca that were followed with an awkward pause, a momentary uncertainty about how Eleanor would react. But Eleanor simply nodded. Rebecca was good with numbers? The best, David said, relaxing. She was an accountant before the girls were born. Could do complex calculations in her head faster than most people could with calculator. That explains it, Eleanor said, giving Olivia's shoulder a gentle squeeze. You've inherited a valuable gift. Emma tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. What did I inherit, Eleanor? From my mom? Eleanor considered the 6-year-old thoughtfully. Well, from what your father has told me, you have her compassion, her ability to understand how other people are feeling, and her artistic talent. Those drawings you made yesterday were extraordinary. Emma beamed, pleased with this assessment. And what did we inherit from you? Olivia asked suddenly, the question catching everyone off guard. A complex emotion crossed Eleanor's face. Surprise, followed by something deeper, more vulnerable. Well, we're not biologically. I know that, Olivia said with the directness of childhood. But Dad says families are made in lots of different ways. So what parts of you are we getting? David watched Eleanor carefully, seeing the moment when her professional composure melted into something more genuine. I hope, she said softly, that you're getting my determination. My belief that you can accomplish anything you set your minds to. And perhaps my sense of adventure. There's a whole world out there beyond Seattle, and someday, I'd love to show it to you. I'd like that, Olivia said seriously, while Emma nodded enthusiastically. Me too, David added, and the smile Eleanor gave him held a warmth that hadn't been there in their earliest interactions. These small moments of connection were happening more frequently now, a shared glance over the girls' heads, a brush of hands when passing the salt at dinner, a quiet conversation on the porch after the children were in bed. Nothing romantic exactly, but something evolving beyond their initial business arrangement. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. That'll be Mrs. Patterson, Eleanor said, glancing at her watch. She's driving me to the office today, since my car's in for service. David, do you still want to take the girls to school on your way to physical therapy? Absolutely, he said. We've got it all worked out, don't we, girls? As the family scattered to their respective morning tasks, David caught Eleanor by the elbow just before she reached the front door. You're good with them, he said quietly. Better than good. I just wanted you to know that. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Pleasure, relief, perhaps both. Thank you, that means more than you know. She hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed his cheek, the briefest touch of lips against skin. "Have a good day," she said, and was gone before he could respond. David stood in the hallway, hand raised to the spot where her lips had touched, a curious warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the morning coffee. In the background, he could hear the girls chattering as they gathered their backpacks, the dogs padding across the hardwood floors, the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson's car starting in the driveway. The sounds of home, the sounds of family, different from what he'd had with Rebecca, but no less real for that difference. The Morrison Foundation Gala was exactly the kind of event David had dreaded. Hundreds of Seattle's wealthiest and most influential citizens gathered in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns, networking and socializing under the guise of charity. "Stop fidgeting," Eleanor murmured, laying a calming hand on his arm. "You look handsome. No one is judging you." "Everyone is judging," David replied under his breath, acutely aware of the speculative glances being cast their way. "I've been the new Mr. Harrington in 3 different conversations already." Eleanor's lips curved in amusement. "Would you prefer I had taken your name?" "Eleanor Reynolds has a certain ring to it." "You know that's not what I meant." But her teasing had achieved its purpose, relaxing him slightly. "I just feel like I'm under a microscope tonight." "You are," Eleanor acknowledged. "We both are. But in a few hours it will be over, and the gossips will find someone else to dissect." She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "You'll remember why we're here. The Morrison Foundation funds scholarships for children who've lost parents in workplace accidents. This matters." David nodded, properly chastened. Eleanor was right. His discomfort was nothing compared to the Foundation's important work, especially given his own experience with a construction site accident. "Mrs. Harrington!" A booming voice interrupted them, and David turned to see a portly man in his 60s approaching, champagne in hand. "Delighted to see you here tonight. And this must be the new husband we've all been hearing about." "Bradford," Eleanor greeted him with practiced warmth. "Yes, this is my husband, David Reynolds. David, this is Bradford Collins, one of our most generous donors and a longtime friend of the Foundation." "Reynolds, not Harrington?" Bradford raised an eyebrow. "How refreshingly modern of you, Eleanor." David extended his hand, determined to make a good impression for Eleanor's sake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Collins. Eleanor has spoken highly of your contributions to the Foundation." "Has she now?" Bradford seemed pleased. "And what do you think of our little gathering? Quite different from construction sites, I imagine." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Before David could respond, Eleanor intervened smoothly. "David has been instrumental in helping me revise some of the Foundation's workplace safety initiatives. His practical experience has been invaluable. Perspectives you simply can't get from behind a desk." Bradford's expression shifted to one of grudging respect. "Is that so? Perhaps we should talk sometime, Reynolds. I have investments in several development projects that could benefit from that kind of insight." "I'd be happy to," David said, surprised by the sudden shift. He caught Eleanor's eye, acknowledging her deft handling of the situation. As Bradford moved on to greet other guests, David leaned closer to Eleanor. "Thank you for that." "For what?" she asked innocently. "I merely stated the truth. Your insights have been valuable. I meant what I said about the safety initiatives." "When did I provide these insights?" David asked, puzzled. "We've never discussed the Foundation's work." Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "You talk in your sleep." Before David could process this unexpected revelation, they were approached by a striking woman in her 40s, elegant in a red gown that complemented her dark skin and close-cropped silver hair. "Eleanor," the woman embraced her warmly. "It's been too long." "Vivian," Eleanor returned the embrace with genuine affection. "David, this is Dr. Vivian Carter, head of neurosurgery at Seattle Presbyterian and a dear friend. Vivian, my husband, David Reynolds." The famous David, Vivian's handshake was firm, her assessment direct but kind. "Eleanor has told me so much about you. All good, I assure you." "I wish I could say the same," David replied honestly. "But Eleanor has many friends I'm still learning about." Vivian laughed. "Eleanor and I go back 20 years. I operated on Sarah when she first came back from Afghanistan. That's how we met. And now I occasionally help Eleanor with medical assessments for the Foundation." Vivian is being modest, Eleanor added. She's pioneered several surgical techniques for traumatic brain injuries. Many of our veterans owe their lives to her work. As the conversation continued, David found himself gradually relaxing. Unlike Bradford, Vivian treated him as Eleanor's equal, asking thoughtful questions about his background and his adjustment to their new life together, without a hint of condescension. When Vivian eventually excused herself to greet other colleagues, David felt a new appreciation for the complex world Eleanor navigated so effortlessly, a world of power, privilege, and deeply interconnected relationships that she was now helping him learn to navigate as well. She's wonderful, he said, watching Vivian cross the room. Why haven't I met her before? Vivian travels constantly for conferences and surgical demonstrations, Eleanor explained. But she's one of my closest friends. Sarah adored her, called her Aunt Viv even after she grew up. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face at the mention of Sarah, and David instinctively placed his hand at the small of her back, a small gesture of support that earned him a grateful glance. Eleanor, a male voice interrupted, smoother and more cultured than Bradford's. You look absolutely radiant tonight. Marriage clearly agrees with you. David turned to find himself face to face with Thomas Blackwood, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his expression one of practiced charm that didn't reach his eyes. Thomas, Eleanor's voice cooled noticeably. I didn't expect to see you here. The Morrison Foundation isn't usually your preferred charity. I've developed a sudden interest in workplace safety, Thomas replied, his gaze shifting to David, especially since your personal connection to the cause became apparent. The emphasis he placed on personal connection carried unmistakable insinuation, and David felt Eleanor stiffen beside him. Thomas Blackwood, the man extended his hand to David. Eleanor and I work closely together at Harrington Industries. Very closely. David Reynolds, David returned the handshake, meeting Thomas's assessing gaze directly. Eleanor has mentioned you. All good things, I hope? Thomas's smile was razor sharp. Actually, she rarely mentions you at all, David replied mildly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Thomas's face before his smooth veneer reasserted itself. Well, we're all busy people. Speaking of which, Eleanor, the Chen proposal needs your urgent attention. The numbers aren't adding up, and the board is concerned. The Chen proposal is proceeding exactly as planned, Eleanor responded coolly. And as I've told you repeatedly, Thomas, if the board has concerns, they can address them to me directly at our next meeting. Now, if you'll excuse us, I see the foundation director signaling for more army. She took David's arm, guiding him away from Thomas, whose expression had hardened into something much less charming. That man thoroughly dislikes you, David observed quietly as they crossed the ballroom. The feeling is entirely mutual, Eleanor replied. Thomas has been trying to undermine me for years, first to get my job, and now it seems to disrupt my personal life as well. Is he dangerous? David asked, thinking of the girls, of their newfound stability. Eleanor considered this carefully. Not physically dangerous, no, but he's ambitious, vindictive, and morally flexible. A man like that can cause different kinds of harm. They had reached a quieter corner of the ballroom, partially concealed behind a massive floral arrangement. Eleanor turned to face David, her expression serious. I should have warned you more explicitly about Thomas. I'm sorry for that oversight. He's likely to approach you when I'm not around, perhaps offer friendship, information, even financial opportunities. Don't trust him, David. Not ever. The intensity of her warning surprised him. I'm not easily manipulated, Eleanor. I know that, she said, her expression softening. But Thomas is exceptionally good at finding people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them, and he's determined to find yours. Before David could respond, the foundation director approached, requesting Eleanor's presence for the ceremonial check presentation. As she moved away, David felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He turned to find Thomas Blackwood observing him from across the room, champagne glass raised in mocking salute. David maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. Whatever game Thomas was playing, David had faced far worse adversaries on the battlefield, and he had far more to protect now than he'd ever had before. Dad, is Eleanor going to be our mom now? Emma's question came out of nowhere as David tucked her into bed later that week. Eleanor was working late, and he had resumed the bedtime routine alone. David sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer. Eleanor is married to me now, which makes her your stepmother, but she doesn't expect to replace your mom. No one could ever replace your mom. Emma nodded thoughtfully, clutching her stuffed elephant. I don't remember Mom very much anymore, she confessed in a small voice. Just bits and pieces, like the smell of her hair and how she sang when she thought no one was listening. David's heart constricted. Emma had been only 2 when Rebecca died, too young to form lasting memories. That's okay, sweetheart. I remember her for both of us, and I'll always tell you stories about her. And we have pictures. Eleanor put a picture of Mom in my room, Emma said, pointing to the nightstand where a silver frame held a photograph of Rebecca holding infant Emma. She said it's important to remember the people we love, even when they're gone. David hadn't noticed the photograph before, and the thoughtfulness of the gesture caught him off guard. When did she do that? The day after we moved in. She said Mom is still part of our family, just in a different way now. From the doorway came Olivia's voice. She put one in my room too, and she asked me questions about Mom, what she was like, what I remember. She wrote it all down in a special book she's keeping for us. David turned to find his older daughter watching them, her expression solemn. She's making a memory book for us about Mom, Olivia continued, so we won't forget. She said she wishes she had done that for her own mom, who died when she was little. This was news to David. Eleanor had never mentioned losing her mother young. Another piece of her carefully guarded past, revealed not to him, but to his daughters. He felt a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude for Eleanor's efforts to preserve Rebecca's memory, curiosity about Eleanor's own childhood losses, and a growing awareness of how deeply Eleanor was integrating herself into their family's emotional landscape. That's a wonderful thing for her to do, he said finally. Dad? Olivia approached the bed, her expression troubled. At school today, Madeline Parker said Eleanor only married you for charity, that you're her project. Is that true? David felt a flash of anger at the cruelty children could casually inflict, followed by the uncomfortable realization that Olivia's question touched on his own lingering insecurities about the marriage. No, that's not true, he said firmly. Eleanor and I married for complicated adult reasons that are hard to explain, but charity wasn't one of them. We're partners, helping each other build a new kind of family. But you don't love each other, Olivia persisted. Not like you loved Mom. Love comes in many different forms, Liv, David said, echoing Sarah's final words without realizing it. Eleanor and I care about each other and respect each other. We're building something important together. Sometimes love grows from that foundation. Are you going to fall in love with her? Emma asked sleepily, the conversation having exhausted her. David smoothed her hair back from her forehead. I don't know, sweetheart. Life is unpredictable that way. I think you might, Emma murmured, her eyes drifting closed. She looks at you the way princesses look at princes in my storybooks, when you're not watching. David exchanged a surprised glance with Olivia, who nodded confirmation. She does, Olivia agreed, and you look at her the same way when she's not watching. After both girls were finally asleep, David lingered in the hallway, processing their observations. Did he look at Eleanor that way? Did she look at him with something more than partnership or friendship in her eyes? He'd been so focused on making the arrangement work, on helping the girls adjust, on learning to navigate Eleanor's world, that he hadn't fully examined his own evolving feelings for his new wife. She was undeniably brilliant, unexpectedly kind beneath her businesslike exterior, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards and everything to do with the force of her personality. But love? That seemed both too simple and too complicated for what was developing between them. The sound of the front door opening interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor was home, earlier than expected. David made his way downstairs to find her in the kitchen, still in her business attire but with her heels kicked off, pouring a glass of wine. You're back early, he observed. She looked up, a tired smile crossing her face. The Chen negotiations wrapped up sooner than anticipated. They accepted our final offer. She gestured with the wine bottle. Would you like some? It's been a day worth celebrating. Congratulations, David accepted the offered glass. The girls just went down. They were asking about you earlier. Were they? Eleanor's expression softened. I've missed them today. And you, she added, the words coming out naturally, as if she'd said them 100 times before. There was a moment of surprised silence as they both registered what she'd said. Eleanor recovered first, taking a sip of wine to cover the slight flush that had risen to her cheeks. How was physical therapy? She asked, clearly changing the subject. David allowed the deflection. Good. Dr. Ramos thinks I might be able to start some light construction consulting work soon. Nothing physical, just project assessment and safety evaluation. That's wonderful news, Eleanor said, her genuine pleasure in his progress evident. You know, Harrington Industries could use that kind of expertise. If you're interested, that is. No pressure. David had been expecting this offer sooner or later. Wouldn't that create complications? Being your employee as well as your husband? You wouldn't be my employee, Eleanor clarified. You'd be an independent consultant reporting to the project management team. I'd have no direct oversight of your work. You've thought this through, David observed. I think everything through, Eleanor replied with a small smile. It's both my greatest strength and my most annoying quality, according to Sarah. The mention of Sarah created a bridge to the questions raised by his daughters earlier. The girls told me about the memory book you're making about Rebecca, about the photographs you put in their rooms. Thank you for that. Eleanor set down her wine glass, her expression turning serious. Children need their history, David, all of it, not just the parts that are convenient or comfortable for the adults around them. I would never want to erase Rebecca from their lives. She'll always be their mother, their first source of love and identity. They also mentioned that you lost your mother young, David said carefully, watching her reaction. You've never talked about that. Eleanor's face closed slightly, the professional mask slipping back into place. Yes, well, it was a long time ago. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, David assured him. I just realized there's still so much I don't know about you. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass. My mother died when I was 11, she finally said. She was a concert pianist, very talented, very beautiful, very troubled. She took her own life after years of struggling with what would now be diagnosed as bipolar disorder. David felt the weight of this revelation. I'm sorry, Eleanor. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, she acknowledged simply. My father was not equipped to deal with a grieving daughter. He sent me to boarding school in Switzerland 2 weeks after her funeral. I didn't return to the States until college. The clinical way she recounted this childhood trauma spoke volumes about how deeply it had affected her. And your father, are you still in touch? He died my senior year at Harvard, heart attack on his yacht in Monaco. We weren't close. Eleanor's tone made it clear this was as much as she was willing to share for now. David respected her boundaries, changing the subject slightly. Is that why music is so important to you? Because of your mother? Something in Eleanor relaxed, the tension in her shoulders easing. Yes, though it took me years to be able to play again after she died. Sarah's interest in piano was what finally brought me back to it. She wanted to learn, and I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else teaching her. You're wonderful with Olivia, David said. Her playing has improved so much in just these few weeks. She has natural talent, Eleanor replied, like Rebecca, apparently. There was no jealousy or resentment in her tone, just acknowledgement of a fact. David felt another piece of his lingering wariness dissolve. This woman who had every material advantage in life, but had suffered her own profound losses, was genuinely trying to honor his past while building their future. Thank you, he said simply, for everything you're doing for us. Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze directly. You don't need to keep thanking me, David. This arrangement benefits me as much as it does you, perhaps more. How so? She gestured around the kitchen at the children's artwork, magnetized to the refrigerator, the family calendar hanging on the wall, the dog toys scattered across the floor. For 20 years, I have lived in houses that were really just showcases. Perfect, immaculate, and utterly empty of life. Now I have muddy footprints on my floors, piano music at odd hours, and dinner conversations that don't revolve around stock prices or corporate acquisitions. Her voice softened. I have people who notice when I come home early and miss me when I'm gone. That's worth more than anything else I've accumulated. The vulnerability in her admission created a shift in the air between them. David moved closer, drawn by an impulse he didn't fully understand. Eleanor remained still, watching him with an expression that mingled caution with something that might have been hope. Before either of them could speak, Eleanor's phone rang sharply, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Thomas. At this hour, it can't be good news." She answered with her professional voice, all traces of the personal conversation vanishing. "Thomas, what is it?" David couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Eleanor's expression harden, her posture straightening into the commanding presence that had first impressed him in the coffee shop. "That's absolutely unacceptable," she said after listening for several moments. "No, I won't authorize that kind of approach. We've already discussed this. The Morrison project will proceed according to the original safety protocols, regardless of the additional cost." Another pause as she listened, her knuckles whitening around the phone. "I don't care what the board is saying behind my back, Thomas. I'm still CEO, and until that changes, we will not cut corners on worker safety to improve quarterly numbers. Is that understood?" Whatever Thomas said in response clearly didn't satisfy her. "This conversation is over. We'll discuss it tomorrow in the office, not in my home at night when I'm with my family." She ended the call with more force than necessary, setting the phone down with controlled precision that spoke of suppressed anger. "Trouble to you?" David asked quietly. Eleanor took a deep breath, visibly composing herself. "Nothing I can't handle. Thomas is pushing for changes to our safety protocols on the Morrison redevelopment project, changes that would save money but potentially put workers at risk, the kind of changes that could lead to accidents like yours." David felt a chill at the mention of the Morrison site, the same development company where his accident had occurred, now apparently working with Harrington Industries on a new project. "Is that common in the industry, cutting safety corners?" "More common than it should be," Eleanor admitted, "but not in my company. Never in my company." The fierceness in her voice was unmistakable. "Especially not after what happened to you. Not after what Sarah asked me to do." There was something she wasn't telling him, some connection between his accident, the Morrison Company, and her current conflict with Thomas. But before he could probe further, Eleanor's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression changed from anger to concern. "It's Mrs. Patterson. There's been a problem at the office. A water pipe burst near the server room. I need to go in." She looked up apologetically. "I'm sorry, David. We'll have to continue this conversation another time." "Of course," he said, though he felt the moment slipping away, along with the chance to understand what had just happened. "Do what you need to do." Eleanor hesitated, then impulsively leaned forward and kissed his cheek, the same brief, affectionate gesture she'd given him that morning. "Thank you for understanding. I won't be late." After she left, David stood alone in the kitchen, replaying their conversation in his mind. There were layers to Eleanor Harrington that he was only beginning to uncover. Personal history, business rivalries, and secrets she wasn't yet ready to share. He found himself drawn to these complexities, to the woman who could be both the tough CEO and the stepmother carefully preserving his daughter's memories of their mother. The woman whose carefully constructed walls occasionally revealed glimpses of deep vulnerability and unexpected warmth. Perhaps Olivia and Emma were right. Perhaps he was looking at Eleanor differently than he had at the beginning. The question was, what did that mean for their carefully negotiated arrangement? And what other secrets was Eleanor keeping that might affect the fragile family they were building together? The throbbing in David's back woke him at 3 a.m. He lay still for a moment, using the pain management techniques his therapist had taught him, before carefully sitting up. The guest room, his room now, he supposed, was bathed in moonlight filtering through the partially open curtains. Knowing from experience that sleep would be elusive until the pain subsided, he decided to make his way downstairs for his medication and perhaps some hot tea. He moved through the silent house with practiced quiet, avoiding the creaky step third from the bottom that might wake the girls. As he passed Eleanor's study, he noticed a sliver of light beneath the door. It wasn't unusual for her to work late, but 3 a.m. seemed extreme even by her standards. Concerned, he knocked softly. "Eleanor, are you all right?" There was a moment of silence, then Eleanor's voice, strained in a way he'd never heard before. "David? Yes, I'm fine, just catching up on some work. Something in her tone triggered his protective instincts. May I come in? Another pause. Yes, yes, of course. He opened the door to find Eleanor sitting behind her desk, still in the clothes she'd worn to the office earlier, though her hair had come loose from its usual perfect arrangement. What shocked him was her expression, a raw vulnerability that she'd never allowed him to see before. Her eyes reddened as if she'd been crying. Before her on the desk lay a spread of photographs and what appeared to be police reports. David caught glimpses of smashed vehicles, emergency lights, and official-looking documents before Eleanor quickly gathered them into a folder. Couldn't sleep? She asked, her voice steadier now, professional mask sliding back into place. Back pain, he explained, moving further into the room. Eleanor, what are you doing up at this hour? And what are those? He nodded toward the folder she'd just closed. Eleanor hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Today was the anniversary of Sarah's accident, she finally said. 3 years since the drunk driver hit her car. Understanding dawned. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I didn't mention it, Eleanor said, absently straightening papers that didn't need straightening. I thought I could treat it like any other day. I was wrong. David moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. You don't have to hide your grief, Eleanor. Not from me, not from the girls. It's part of who you are. Eleanor looked up at him, her composure cracking once more. I've spent my entire adult life hiding my emotions, David. In business, showing vulnerability is like showing your throat to wolves. It becomes a habit that's hard to break. David gestured to the folder. Is that why you're looking at accident reports in the middle of the night? Alone? A flash of something, guilt, fear, crossed Eleanor's face. I review them every year, trying to understand, trying to make sense of what happened. There was more to it than that, David sensed, but he didn't push. Instead, he extended his hand. Come upstairs. You need rest, not more painful memories tonight. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before placing her own in it, allowing him to help her up. They stood close together in the quiet study, her hand still in his, connected in a way that transcended their legal arrangement. Sarah would have liked you, Eleanor said suddenly. Not just the young soldier who saved her life, but the man you are now, the father, the husband. The word husband lingered between them, taking on new weight in the intimacy of the moment. David found himself studying Eleanor's face, the fine lines around her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, the intelligence and strength in her gaze, even when shadowed by grief. Without conscious decision, he leaned forward, closing the final distance between them. The kiss was gentle, questioning rather than demanding. Eleanor remained still for a heartbeat, then responded with a tenderness that belied her usual self-containment. Her hand rose to rest against his chest, neither pushing him away nor pulling him closer, simply connecting. When they separated, David searched her face for regret or discomfort, finding instead a complex mixture of surprise, warmth, and something like wonder. That wasn't in our agreement, she said softly, but there was no accusation in her tone. No, David agreed, it wasn't. Should I apologize? Eleanor considered this, her analytical mind never fully at rest even in such a moment. I don't think so, but we should be careful, David. There's more at stake here than just you and me. The girls, he nodded. The girls, she confirmed, and other complications you don't yet know about. And there it was again, the hint of secrets kept, of information withheld. Eleanor, whatever it is, she placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. Not tonight, please. Tonight, let's just... She didn't finish the thought, but David understood. Tonight was for grief and unexpected comfort, not for revelations that might shatter their fragile peace. He nodded, accepting her boundary. I'll walk you upstairs, he said simply. They moved through the darkened house together, fingers loosely intertwined, neither speaking of what had just happened or what it might mean. At Eleanor's bedroom door, they paused. Good night, David, she said, her voice steadier now. And thank you. For what? For seeing me, she replied. The real me, not just the CEO or the wealthy benefactor or any of the other roles I play. It's been a long time since anyone really saw me. With that, she slipped into her room, leaving David in the hallway with the ghost of her kiss still lingering on his lips and the certainty that whatever understanding they had reached in the beginning of their arrangement was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. And somewhere in the shadows of Eleanor's grief and carefully guarded secrets lurked information that could either strengthen their unexpected bond or shatter it completely. Emma's fever spiked without warning. One moment she was playing with Gatsby in the garden, the next she was burning up and listless, her usually bright eyes glazed with illness. 103.8, David read the thermometer with growing alarm. We need to get her to the ER. Eleanor was already gathering Emma's favorite stuffed elephant in a blanket. I'll call ahead to Seattle Presbyterian. Vivian is on duty tonight. She'll make sure Emma gets immediate attention. The drive to the hospital was tense, with Emma drifting in and out of awareness in the back seat, her small hand clutched in David's, while Eleanor drove with focused precision. They were met at the emergency entrance by a team alerted by Dr. Carter, who whisked Emma away for immediate evaluation. Probable bacterial infection, Vivian told them an hour later in a private waiting room. We're starting IV antibiotics, but I want to keep her overnight for observation. Her immune system is fighting hard, but the fever is concerning. Can we stay with her? David asked, his voice rough with worry. Of course, Vivian assured him. She's being moved to a private room now. Eleanor's foundation donations haven't gone to waste. We have excellent pediatric facilities here. Once Emma was settled in her hospital room, connected to IVs and monitors that beeped with reassuring regularity, the initial panic began to subside. David sat beside the bed, holding his daughter's hand, while Eleanor spoke quietly with the nursing staff, ensuring everything possible was being done. You should call Olivia, Eleanor suggested gently. She'll be worried when Mrs. Patterson picks her up from her piano lesson and we're not home. David nodded, reluctantly leaving Emma's side to make the call in the hallway. When he returned, he found Eleanor seated in his place, softly singing what sounded like a French lullaby while stroking Emma's hair back from her forehead. The tenderness in the gesture caught at his heart. Olivia's fine, he reported quietly. Mrs. Patterson will stay with her at the house tonight. She sends her love to Emma. Eleanor nodded without interrupting her singing. Emma's eyes had drifted closed, her breathing more even now as the medication began to take effect. David took the chair on the opposite side of the bed, completing their circle around the sleeping child. Hours passed, nurses came and went, checking vital signs and adjusting medications. Vivian returned twice to examine Emma personally, each time reassuring them that she was responding well to treatment. Eventually, the hospital quieted for the night. The overhead lights dimmed, and Emma slept peacefully between them. David watched Eleanor across the bed, her silver hair falling loose around her shoulders, her elegant business attire incongruous in the sterile hospital setting, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. She had canceled a major business dinner without hesitation when he'd called about Emma's fever, had driven them to the hospital herself rather than sending a car, had used her connections to ensure the best care, but then stepped back to let the medical professionals do their work without interference. In this crisis, the lines between their arrangement and a real marriage had blurred beyond recognition. Eleanor wasn't acting like a stepmother bound by legal agreement. She was acting like a mother, with all the fear, love, and fierce protection that entailed. You should try to sleep, Eleanor said softly, noticing his gaze. The chair reclines. I'll watch her. I'm all right, David replied. What about you? You have that board meeting tomorrow. Eleanor dismissed this with a small gesture. Thomas can handle it. Emma is more important. The simplicity of her statement, the absolute certainty in her voice, moved something deep within David. You love her, he observed. Both of them. Eleanor looked startled, as if this obvious truth had somehow escaped her own notice until he named it. Yes, she admitted. I do. More than I thought possible in such a short time. They love you too, David said, especially Emma. She told me the other day that she wished she could call you Mom, but was afraid it would make Rebecca sad in heaven. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. What did you tell her? That Rebecca would want her to be happy, and that having more people to love her could never make her mother sad. David hesitated, then added, I think she's going to ask you soon if it's okay to call you Mom sometimes, just so you're prepared. Eleanor nodded, clearly too emotional to speak. After a moment, she reached across Emma's sleeping form and extended her hand to David. He took it, their fingers intertwining naturally now, the connection between them strengthened by shared concern for the child they both loved. They remained that way through the night, holding hands across Emma's hospital bed, neither speaking of the barriers that continued to fall between them or the complications that still lurked beneath the surface of their evolving relationship. For now, it was enough to be united in their vigil, in their shared love for a little girl who had unexpectedly brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. Morning found them still in the same position, both having dozed off in their uncomfortable chairs without releasing their handhold. They were awakened by Emma's small voice, raspy, but much stronger than it had been the night before. "Daddy? Eleanor, why are we holding hands in my hospital room?" They both startled awake, exchanging slightly embarrassed glances before focusing on Emma, whose fever had clearly broken overnight. "Because we were worried about you, sweetheart," David explained, checking her forehead with his free hand. "How are you feeling?" "Thirsty," Emma replied, "and hungry. Can I have pancakes?" Eleanor laughed, the sound bright with relief. "I think we can arrange that once Dr. Carter says it's okay. You gave us quite a scare, young lady." Emma looked between them, her gaze settling on their still joined hands with the perceptiveness of childhood. "Are you going to be like a real married couple now, with kissing and everything?" David felt Eleanor's fingers tighten momentarily around his before she gently disengaged to brush Emma's hair back from her face. "Would that be okay with you if we were?" she asked carefully. Emma considered this with comical seriousness. "I guess so, as long as you don't get mushy in public like Madeline Parker's parents. That's embarrassing." "We promise to contain our mushiness to appropriate private settings," Eleanor said solemnly, though her eyes danced with amusement when she glanced at David. The moment was interrupted by a nurse entering with Emma's morning medications and the news that her blood tests were looking much better. By the time Vivian arrived to examine her, Emma was sitting up, coloring in a book one of the nurses had brought her, and asking when she could go home. "Probably this afternoon if her labs continue to improve," Vivian told David and Eleanor in the hallway. "She's responding remarkably well to the antibiotics. Children are incredibly resilient." "Thank you, Vivian," Eleanor said, embracing her friend. "We can't tell you how much—" "No thanks necessary," Vivian interrupted with a warm smile. "Though I must say, seeing you in mother mode is quite the revelation, Eleanor. It suits you." After Vivian left, David and Eleanor stood in the hallway, both suddenly aware of the night's shift in their relationship and uncertain how to proceed in the bright light of day. "I should call the office," Eleanor said. "Let them know I won't be in today either. And I should update Olivia and Mrs. Patterson," David added. They both reached for their phones, using the practical task as a momentary buffer against the conversation they would eventually need to have. But as Eleanor turned to make her call, David caught her arm gently. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "last night in the hospital room, that wasn't just because of Emma's illness, was it? What's happening between us?" Eleanor met his gaze directly, her professional mask nowhere in evidence. "No, it wasn't just because of Emma, and I don't know exactly what's happening, David. I didn't plan for this." "Neither did I," he admitted. "But here we are." "Here we are," she echoed. "Perhaps we should talk about it. Later, when Emma's home and things are calmer." David nodded, releasing her arm. "Later," he agreed. But as they returned to Emma's room, their phones still in hand, a commotion at the nurse's station caught their attention. A photographer was being escorted out by security, protesting loudly about freedom of the press and public interest. "What's going on?" David asked one of the nurses. "Paparazzi," she explained with disgust. "Trying to get photos of your family during a medical emergency. Apparently someone tipped them off that the Harrington Reynolds family was here." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Thomas," she said, her voice low with anger. "This has his fingerprints all over it." Before David could respond, his phone chimed with a news alert. His stomach dropped as he read the headline. "Harrington heiress rushed to hospital. Trouble in paradise for Seattle's most controversial couple." He showed it to Eleanor, whose face went from anger to something closer to fear. "We need to get Emma home as soon as possible," she said. "And then there are things I need to tell you, David, things I should have told you from the beginning." The gravity in her tone sent a chill through him. Whatever secrets Eleanor had been keeping, it seemed they were about to come to light, whether she was ready or not. The manila folder landed on the coffee table between them with a soft thud. "This is everything," Eleanor said. "Everything I know about your accident at the Morrison site." They sat in Eleanor's study, the door closed to ensure privacy, while Mrs. Patterson watched the girls upstairs. Emma had been released from the hospital that afternoon, tired but recovering well, and was now resting comfortably in her room with Olivia keeping protective watch over her younger sister. David stared at the folder, not yet reaching for it. "What does my accident have to do with what happened at the hospital today? With the press?" Eleanor's expression was grave. "Everything, I'm afraid. Thomas is using your past, and mine, to try to force me out of the company. He's painting our marriage as a scandal, a cover-up, a desperate attempt to silence you." "Silence me about what?" "About who really owns Morrison Development." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Harrington Industries has been the majority silent partner in Morrison Development for the past 5 years. The accident that injured you, that ended your construction career, it happened on a site ultimately controlled by my company." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. "You, your company was responsible for the safety violations that nearly killed me?" "Not directly, no. Morrison operates independently, makes its own day-to-day decisions. But yes, ultimately, the responsibility traces back to Harrington Industries." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't know about the safety issues at the time. I would never have allowed them. But ignorance isn't an excuse when you're the CEO." David felt as if the ground were shifting beneath him. "Did you know this when you approached me in the coffee shop? Was this all about avoiding a lawsuit?" Pain flashed across Eleanor's face. "No, David, God, no. I approached you because of Sarah, because of her dying wish. I didn't even make the connection to the Morrison accident until after our first meeting, when I was reviewing your background more thoroughly. And you didn't think this was something I should know? That I was marrying the woman whose company was responsible for the accident that destroyed my career, that left me unable to properly provide for my daughters?" Eleanor flinched at the anger in his voice. "I was going to tell you, I couldn't find the right moment. And then we were building something good, something real, and I was afraid. Afraid I'd walk away? Afraid I'd sue?" David stood up, too agitated to remain seated. "What exactly were you afraid of, Eleanor?" "Afraid you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me now," she whispered. "Like I'm the enemy. Like everything between us has been a lie. Hasn't it?" The words came out harsher than he intended, fueled by shock and betrayal. "No." Eleanor's voice strengthened. "The arrangement may have begun that way, a business transaction, a mutually beneficial partnership. But what's grown between us, David, with you, with the girls, that's been real. More real than anything I've known in years." David paced the study, struggling to process this new information. "What else haven't you told me? What other secrets are you keeping?" Eleanor rose to face him. "One more. The psychological evaluation I had done before approaching you, it wasn't just standard due diligence. I was genuinely concerned about your mental state, about the possibility that I might what, Eleanor? Kill myself?" The bluntness of his question made her wince. The investigator I hired noticed patterns that worried him. Isolation, financial distress, untreated depression following multiple traumatic losses. Yes, I was concerned. "Is that so terrible?" "So our marriage was what, suicide prevention disguised as a business arrangement?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Our marriage was many things, David. A promise to my daughter, a chance for your girls to have stability and opportunities, a way for me to have the family I've always wanted. And yes, perhaps initially it was also a way to help a man I believed might be in danger. I had multiple motivations, just as you did when you accepted my proposal." The painful truth of her words gave David pause. His own motivations hadn't been simple either. Financial security for his daughters? Yes, but also a desperate need to not fail them, as he felt he'd been failing since Rebecca's death. "Why is Thomas using this against you now?" he asked finally, his voice calmer. "Why the press? Why the photos at the hospital?" Eleanor sank back into her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. Because I've been blocking his attempts to cut safety regulations on our projects. Because I've initiated a complete overhaul of all our construction safety protocols since learning about your accident. And because, as my husband, you would have a conflict of interest in suing the company, which removes one of his potential weapons against me. He wants to force you out of the company, David realized. Make it look like you married me to cover up corporate negligence. Exactly. And with the board already concerned about my personal distractions, this could be the leverage he needs. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. I'm sorry, David. I should have told you everything from the beginning. You deserve that honesty. David picked up the folder, finally opening it to reveal detailed accident reports, medical assessments, and corporate documents tracing the ownership of Morrison Development back to Harrington Industries. I've already instructed my legal team to prepare a compensation package for you, Eleanor continued. Regardless of what happens between us personally, you deserve restitution for what happened to you at a site my company ultimately controlled. David looked up sharply. You think I want money from you? I think you deserve justice, Eleanor replied. And I think your daughters deserve security, whether or not you choose to remain in this marriage. The implication hung in the air between them, that David might choose to leave now that he knew the truth. The thought sent an unexpected pang through him, a visceral resistance to the idea of walking away from the life they'd begun to build together. And what do you want, Eleanor? He asked quietly. She met his gaze directly, all pretense and professional distance stripped away. I want what I've always wanted, David. A family, a home filled with life instead of echoing emptiness. Someone to build a future with. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I want you and the girls, but I won't keep you through deception, no matter how much losing you would hurt. The raw honesty in her admission disarmed his anger, leaving him with the complicated reality of their situation. Eleanor had kept crucial information from him, yes, but she'd also created a home for his daughters, supported his recovery, and gradually opened herself to genuine emotional connection, despite decades of self-protective isolation. I need time to process this, he said finally. Time to think about what it means for us, for the girls. Eleanor nodded, accepting his response without argument. Of course, take all the time you need. She hesitated, then added, Will you be staying here while you decide, or? I'm not going anywhere tonight, David assured her. The girls need stability right now, especially Emma while she's recovering. We don't need to make any hasty decisions. Relief washed across Eleanor's face. Thank you, she said simply. As David turned to leave the study, giving himself space to think, Eleanor's voice stopped him at the door. David, no matter what you decide, I want you to know something. He turned back to find her standing tall despite the vulnerability in her expression. Meeting you and your daughters was the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. If our time together ends tomorrow, I would still consider myself fortunate for having had these months with you. The sincerity in her words stayed with David as he made his way upstairs to check on the girls. He found them both asleep in Emma's room. Olivia had apparently dozed off while reading to her sister, the storybook still open on her lap. Looking at his daughters, peaceful and secure in this home that Eleanor had created for them, David felt the complex tangle of emotions that had been building since Eleanor's revelations. Anger at the deception, yes. Betrayal at having crucial information withheld from him. But also understanding of the fear that had driven her silence, and reluctant acknowledgement that his own feelings for Eleanor had grown far beyond their initial arrangement. The question now was whether those feelings could survive the shadow of secrets revealed, and what Thomas Blackwood might do next to drive them apart. The morning headlines glared from Eleanor's tablet. Harrington CEO's marriage scandal. Silence bought with wedding ring? Accompanying the inflammatory text was a photograph of David carrying Emma from the hospital, Eleanor beside them with a protective arm around them both. What should have been a private family moment had been transformed into tawdry speculation. David set his coffee mug down with more force than necessary. They're painting me as some kind of gold digger who's being paid off for my silence, and you as a corporate shark who'd do anything to avoid a lawsuit. Eleanor's expression remained controlled, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed her distress. Thomas has been planning this for months. The hospital photographer was just the first move. He's been leaking information to the press, building a narrative. What happens now? David asked, his voice low to avoid alerting the girls, who were finishing breakfast in the kitchen. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Eleanor straightened her already perfect suit jacket. They'll want answers about our relationship, about the Morrison connection, about everything. Will you lose the company? The question hung heavy between them. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Possibly. Thomas has been cultivating relationships with key board members for years. If they believe I married you to cover up corporate negligence, to prevent you from suing over your accident. But that's not why we married, David protested, before catching himself. Is it? The momentary flicker of hurt in Eleanor's eyes answered before her words could. No, David, that's not why I married you. But right now, my denials won't carry much weight compared to the evidence Thomas is fabricating. David's phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Reporters outside your old apartment building asking questions about you and Harrington. What's going on? They're going after our past now, David said grimly, showing Eleanor the message. How long before they start approaching the girls' school, their friends? Eleanor's composure finally cracked. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant to drag you and the girls into this kind of spotlight. This is exactly why I should have been honest from the beginning. The sound of small footsteps approaching silenced their conversation. Emma appeared in the doorway, still pale from her recent illness, but bright-eyed. Are we still going to the park today? You promised we could take Fitzgerald and Gatsby for a walk when I felt better. The innocence of the question, the normalcy it represented, created a momentary island of calm in the storm building around them. David and Eleanor exchanged a glance of shared understanding. Whatever their personal turmoil, the children's well-being came first. I think we might need to postpone the park, sweetheart, Eleanor said gently. There are some work complications that have come up. Emma's face fell. But you promised. Both of you promised. David knelt to his daughter's level. I know we did, Em, and we'll keep that promise, just not today. Eleanor has an important meeting and it's always important meetings, Emma interrupted with surprising vehemence. Just like Mommy was always sick, and then she was gone. Adults always break promises. The raw hurt in her voice struck them both like a physical blow. Before either could respond, Olivia appeared behind her sister, school backpack already on her shoulders. There are photographers outside our gate, she announced, her young face serious. Mrs. Patterson says we shouldn't go to school today. She says they'll bother us about you and Eleanor. David felt a surge of protective anger. These children had already lost so much. Their mother, their financial security, their sense of stability. Now they were losing their privacy and sense of safety as well. Eleanor made a quick decision. Mrs. Patterson is right about school, but wrong about the park. We are keeping our promise, Emma. She turned to David. The board meeting isn't until 3. We have time to take the girls and the dogs to Discovery Park. The press won't expect us to be out in public, and it's large enough to find a private spot. David recognized what she was doing, creating one last normal family memory before everything potentially fell apart. Okay, he agreed. Park first, crisis later. The relief and joy on Emma's face confirmed it was the right decision, whatever complications the day might hold. Discovery Park offered the sanctuary they sought, 300 acres of trails and beaches where they could lose themselves for a few precious hours. The girls ran ahead with Fitzgerald and Gatsby, their laughter carrying back on the breeze. Eleanor and David walked more slowly behind them, the weight of unresolved questions heavy between them. David? Eleanor broke the strained silence. Before everything changes this afternoon, I need to know, can you forgive me for not telling you the truth from the beginning? About the accident? About the psychological evaluation? David watched his daughters in the teens, noting how much healthier and happier they looked compared to that first meeting in the coffee shop. I understand why you kept it from me. I might have done the same in your position. That's not forgiveness, Eleanor observed quietly. No, it's not, David agreed, but it's understanding. Forgiveness might take longer. They walked a few more steps in silence before he continued. The question isn't just whether I can forgive you, Eleanor. It's whether what we've built is strong enough to survive the truth coming to light, whether the feelings that have grown between us are real or just convenient fictions we've created to make our arrangement more comfortable. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully. My feelings for you and the girls aren't convenient fictions, David. They're the most inconvenient truth I've ever faced. They've complicated every aspect of my life, made me vulnerable in ways I haven't been in decades, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. The raw honesty in her voice reached past his hurt and anger, touching something deeper. Before he could respond, Emma's screams shattered the moment. Both of them broke into a run toward where the girls had disappeared around a bend in the trail. They found Emma on the ground, Olivia kneeling beside her. She tripped on a root, Olivia explained, her voice trembling but controlled. I think her ankle might be hurt. David gently examined Emma's rapidly swelling ankle while Eleanor calmed the agitated dogs. Probably a sprain, not a break, he assessed with relief. But we should get you home and ice it right away. I can't walk, Emma whimpered. It hurts too much. Without hesitation, Eleanor handed the dog leashes to Olivia and scooped Emma into her arms. I've got you, sweetheart. Just hold on to my neck. I can carry her, David offered, concerned about Eleanor managing the steep trail with Emma's weight. We'll take turns, Eleanor replied, already starting back toward the park entrance. But right now I need to hold her. The naked emotion in Eleanor's voice stopped any further protest. David recognized the truth. Eleanor didn't just want to help. She needed the physical connection to Emma, needed to be the one providing comfort and safety. It wasn't duty or obligation driving her, but the deep, instinctive love of a mother for her child, biology notwithstanding. As they made their way back to the car, taking turns carrying Emma, David watched Eleanor's interaction with both his daughters. The tender way she reassured Emma, the respectful way she guided Olivia to help with the bus, the natural authority and warmth she brought to her role in their lives. Whatever secrets she had kept, whatever complications still lay ahead with Thomas and the board, one truth was undeniable. Eleanor Harrington had become essential to their family. The thought of returning to life without her was suddenly, unexpectedly painful. By the time they reached home, treated Emma's ankle, and settled both girls with Mrs. Patterson for the afternoon, it was nearly time for Eleanor's board meeting. David found her in the bedroom, putting the finishing touches on her appearance. Armor for the battle ahead. I'm coming with you, he said from the doorway. Eleanor turned in surprise. David, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His decision was made. Thomas is using me, ruling our marriage as a weapon against you. I should be there to tell the truth. What truth? Eleanor asked carefully. That you didn't marry me to buy my silence or prevent a lawsuit. That what started as a business arrangement has become something real. That the woman I've come to know these past months isn't capable of the kind of callous manipulation Thomas is suggesting. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. That won't be enough. Thomas has documentation. Evidence. Evidence of what? That your company owned Morrison Development? That doesn't prove your motivations for marrying me. David stepped closer. Let me help you fight this, Eleanor. Let me be the partner I promised to be. The vulnerability that flashed across her face made her look suddenly younger, more accessible. All right, she agreed softly. Together, then. The Harrington Industries boardroom epitomized corporate power, gleaming mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, leather chairs occupied by men and women whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. David felt distinctly out of place in his hastily donned suit, but kept his shoulders square as he entered at Eleanor's side. The ripple of surprise at his presence was visible, especially on Thomas Blackwood's face. The momentary flash of alarm in his eyes confirmed to David that his appearance had not been part of Thomas's carefully orchestrated plan. Mrs. Harrington, the board chairman, Walter Kincaid, began formally. We appreciate your prompt response to our request for this emergency session. However, the presence of your husband was not anticipated. Mr. Reynolds is here at my invitation, Eleanor replied smoothly, taking her seat at the head of the table. As the matters under discussion directly concern him, I believed his perspective would be valuable. Thomas recovered quickly. How convenient that Mr. Reynolds is suddenly available to defend you, Eleanor. One might almost think this appearance was carefully rehearsed. Actually, David interjected before Eleanor could respond. I insisted on coming. When I learned that my marriage was being used as evidence of corporate misconduct, I felt I had both the right and the responsibility to set the record straight. Walter Kincaid frowned. Mr. Reynolds, while we appreciate your concern, this is an internal board matter regarding potential ethical violations by our CEO. Your presence, while unusual, does not change the serious nature of the allegations before us. Which are, Eleanor prompted, her voice steady. Thomas opened a leather portfolio with theatrical precision. The evidence indicates that you, Eleanor, orchestrated a cover-up of safety violations at the Morrison development site, violations that resulted in Mr. Reynolds' career-ending injury. Rather than allow him to pursue legal action that could have exposed Harrington Industries' liability, you approached him with a marriage proposal that provided financial security in exchange for his silence. That's absurd, David began, but Eleanor laid a restraining hand on his arm. The timeline doesn't support your narrative, Thomas, she said calmly. If you examine the company records, you'll see that I wasn't aware of Harrington's ownership stake in Morrison Development until after my initial meeting with David. The structure was deliberately obscured through shell companies by the previous CFO. Convenient, Thomas sneered. And what of the psychological evaluation you commissioned on Mr. Reynolds before approaching him? Was that standard due diligence, or were you assessing his vulnerability to manipulation? A murmur ran through the board members. This clearly was new information to many of them. Eleanor's composure wavered for the first time. I was concerned about his well-being. The investigator I hired noted patterns consistent with severe depression. Given what he'd been through, losing his wife, his career, struggling financially with 2 young children, my concern was justified. So you admit to having him psychologically evaluated without his knowledge or consent before proposing this arrangement, Thomas pressed, sensing an advantage. Yes, Eleanor acknowledged, her gaze steady despite the damning admission. It was an invasion of privacy motivated by genuine concern, not corporate strategy, a human failing, not a business one. Walter Kincaid leaned forward. Mrs. Harrington, these are serious matters that call into question your judgment as CEO. The board must consider, if I may, David interrupted, unable to remain silent any longer. You're all discussing my life, my injury, my marriage, as if they're entries on a balance sheet. I'd like to offer a different perspective. A tense silence fell over the room. Walter Kincaid finally nodded reluctantly. Proceed, Mr. Reynolds. David stood, drawing on the authority he'd once commanded as a military officer and construction foreman. Yes, Eleanor investigated me before approaching me. Yes, she kept certain information from me initially. And yes, when I discovered the truth, I was angry and hurt. He paused, looking at each board member in turn. But what none of you are considering is that if Eleanor's motive was simply to prevent a lawsuit, there were far easier ways to accomplish that. A simple settlement agreement would have sufficed. Instead, she opened her home to me and my daughters. She spent hours helping my eldest with piano lessons, sat in hospital rooms when my youngest was ill, created a stable, loving environment for 2 children who had lost their mother. His voice strengthened with conviction. Eleanor Harrington didn't marry me to protect Harrington Industries. She married me to honor a promise to her daughter, to take care of the man who once saved Sarah's life. And in doing so, she saved mine and my daughter's lives as well, not just financially, but emotionally. Thomas's face had darkened during David's speech. A touching story, Mr. Reynolds. But perhaps your perspective is clouded by gratitude for your improved financial circumstances. The insinuation sparked a flash of anger in David. My perspective is crystal clear, Mr. Blackwood. Clearer than yours, since I know something you don't. And what might that be? Thomas asked dismissively. I signed a legal waiver 3 weeks ago, relinquishing any right to sue Harrington Industries or its subsidiaries for my accident. David reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. Eleanor had her legal team prepare it, and I signed it willingly before I knew about the connection between Harrington and Morrison Development. He passed the document to Walter Kincaid. As you can see, it's properly executed and witnessed. If preventing a lawsuit was Eleanor's primary motive for marrying me, this waiver would have accomplished that goal without the complexity of a marriage. Thomas appeared genuinely taken aback. This could easily have been backdated. Check the digital signature timestamp. Eleanor suggested calmly, and the notary's electronic verification. Both are blockchain secured and impossible to alter. Walter Kincaid examined the document carefully before passing it to the corporate counsel, who nodded confirmation of its authenticity. A shift in the room's energy was palpable, the first narrative crack in Thomas's carefully constructed case. There's something else the board should know, Eleanor continued, seizing the momentum. Thomas's sudden concern about the Morrison development safety violations is particularly interesting given that he personally approved the reduced safety protocols that led to David's accident. She slid a folder across the table to Walter Kincaid. These documents show that Thomas, in his role at the COO, signed off on cost-cutting measures at Morrison Development that included bypassing several critical safety inspections. The same inspections that might have prevented the structural failure that injured David and 3 other workers. Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You can't possibly prove—" "I can and I have," Eleanor interrupted. "When I discovered Harrington's connection to Morrison Development and the circumstances of David's accident, I launched a full internal investigation. The findings are all there, including emails where you specifically instructed Morrison management to expedite the project by circumventing standard safety protocols." The revelation landed like a bombshell in the boardroom. Board members began murmuring among themselves, several reaching for the documents to verify Eleanor's claims. "This is a desperate attempt to deflect from your own ethical violations," Thomas insisted, his composure cracking. "The board shouldn't be distracted by these unsubstantiated accusations." "They're fully substantiated," Eleanor replied evenly, "which is why I've already submitted them to OSHA and the State Attorney General's office. I believe in accountability, Thomas, even when it might reflect poorly on my company." Walter Kincaid looked genuinely disturbed. "Mrs. Harrington, if these allegations against Mr. Blackwood are accurate, why bring them forward only now? Why not when you first discovered them?" Eleanor's expression turned solemn. "Because I believe the appropriate response was systematic reform, not individual scapegoating. Over the past 3 months, I've completely overhauled our safety protocols across all subsidiaries and established an independent safety review board with real authority. The changes have already reduced workplace injuries by 32%. She glanced briefly at David before continuing. "Meeting David and his daughters changed my perspective on what matters most in business and in life. Numbers on a spreadsheet aren't just numbers. They represent real people with families who depend on them. Every worker injured on a Harrington site is someone's father, mother, son, or daughter." A heavy silence settled over the boardroom, and as her words sank in, David watched the board members' expressions shift from suspicion to consideration, and in some cases, to respect. Thomas, sensing his advantage slipping away, made one final desperate play. This emotional appeal doesn't change the fundamental issue. Eleanor Harrington used company resources to investigate a potential litigant, then entered into a personal relationship with him without disclosing the conflict of interest to this board. Her judgment is compromised, her ethics questionable, and her continued leadership puts this company at risk. Walter Kincaid turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Harrington, do you have a response to these specific allegations?" Eleanor rose slowly, her dignity intact despite the hours of accusations. "Yes, I do. I acknowledge that I should have disclosed the potential conflict of interest to the board when I first discovered it. That was an error in judgment for which I take full responsibility." She paused, looking each board member in the eye. "But I categorically reject the implication that my relationship with David was motivated by corporate self-interest. I married him because his courage saved my daughter's life, because his integrity impressed me, and because his daughters reminded me what truly matters in this world." Her voice softened but remained firm. "If the board feels my leadership no longer serves Harrington Industries, I will accept that decision. But I will not apologize for becoming part of David's family, nor for the value and purpose they have brought to my life." The sincerity in her voice resonated through the room. Even Thomas seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Walter Kincaid cleared his throat. "I believe the board has sufficient information to deliberate now. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Reynolds, if you would give us the room." Eleanor nodded gracefully and led David out of the boardroom. In the privacy of her office, she finally allowed herself to sit heavily in her chair, the strain of the confrontation evident in the lines of her face. "Thank you," she said simply, for coming, for speaking up. David took her hand, noticing how cold her fingers felt despite her outward composure. I meant every word, Eleanor. Whatever happens next, whatever the board decides, I want you to know that. She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. Even about being part of our family, after everything you've learned? The question hung between them, weighted with all the complexity of their unconventional beginning and uncertain future. Before David could answer, Mrs. Patterson called his cell phone. Emma's ankle had worsened, and she was asking for both of them. We should go, Eleanor said immediately, professional mask slipping back into place. The board will deliberate it for hours, and Emma needs us now. David nodded, recognizing her deflection, but accepting it for the moment. Their personal reckoning would have to wait. The house was quiet when they returned from the emergency room, Emma finally asleep after having her officially diagnosed sprain properly treated and wrapped. Olivia had insisted on sleeping in her sister's room in case she needs anything in the night, a responsibility she took with characteristic seriousness. David found Eleanor on the back porch, still in her business attire despite the late hour, staring out at the garden where they'd held their wedding ceremony just months before. The board's decision had come via a terse phone call during their hospital wait. She would retain her position as CEO, but with increased oversight and certain restrictions on her authority for the next 6 months. Thomas Blackwood had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of the safety protocol violations. A partial victory, but one that had clearly left Eleanor drained rather than triumphant. You should get some rest, David said, joining her at the railing. It's been a hell of a day, Eleanor nodded without turning. How's Emma? Finally asleep, the pain medication helped. He studied her profile in the soft landscape lighting. And you? How are you holding up? I'm fine, she replied automatically and then sighed. No, that's not true. I'm exhausted, relieved about the board's decision, but hollow somehow. Because of Thomas? Partly. He was Sarah's friend before he was mine. They met at business school, actually. After she died, he was one of the few people who truly understood what I'd lost. Eleanor's voice held no self-pity, just a weary acknowledgement of another betrayal. I knew he wanted my job, but I never thought he'd use Sarah's memory, use you and the girls, to try to take it. David rested his hand next to hers on the railing, not quite touching. You still haven't told me everything, have you? There's something else about Sarah, about the accident. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath confirmed his suspicion. How did you know? The way you guard certain parts of her story. The way you were studying those accident reports that night I found you in your study. There's more to it than just a mother's grief. For a long moment, Eleanor was silent, and David thought she might deflect again. Then she turned to face him fully. Decision made. Thomas was with Sarah the day she died, she said quietly. They'd been having lunch, a business meeting, he claimed later. He'd been drinking. When they left the restaurant, he insisted he was fine to drive. Sarah took his keys, called a rideshare for him, and headed to meet me for our own lunch date. David felt a chill of premonition. And? The drunk driver who hit her car was in a black Audi A8, the same model Thomas drove at the time. Traffic cameras captured the accident, but the license plate was obscured. The driver fled the scene and was never identified. The implication was staggering. You think Thomas was driving? That he caused the accident that killed Sarah? I don't know, Eleanor admitted, the uncertainty clearly tormenting her. The timing works. He could have retrieved his car and been in that intersection when Sarah crossed. He was unreachable for hours after I got the call about the accident, and when he finally surfaced, he had a cut on his forehead he claimed happened at the gym. But you don't have proof, David realized. No, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. Not enough for the police, especially given Thomas's resources and connections. Eleanor's hands tightened on the railing. But there's something else, something I discovered only recently. The last text message Sarah sent before the accident wasn't to me as I'd always thought. It was to Thomas. One word. Why? The simple word hung in the night air between them, laden with terrible possibilities. That's why he's been so determined to discredit you, David said slowly. Not just for your job, but because he's afraid you'll eventually find proof of what he did. Yes, and because I've been systematically increasing safety regulations, investigating accidents, creating accountability systems, that would make it impossible for someone like him to operate with impunity. Eleanor's voice strengthened with resolve. I couldn't save Sarah, but I could make sure no other family lost someone because of corporate negligence or individual recklessness. David finally understood the full weight she'd been carrying, not just grief for her daughter, but the haunting suspicion that someone she'd trusted might have been responsible, and the determination to create meaning from tragedy through systemic change. What will you do now, he asked. Continue the investigation quietly. Keep building safety protocols that protect workers, and hope that someday the truth about Sarah's accident comes to light. Eleanor turned to him, her expression vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. But first, I need to know where we stand, David, you and me, this marriage. After everything that's happened, everything you've learned, do you want to continue what we've started? Or would you prefer we return to our original arrangement? Or she couldn't bring herself to voice the third option, ending the marriage entirely. The fear of his answer was written plainly on her face, all professional masks and defenses stripped away. David stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was making a practical decision for my daughter's security. I had no idea how much it would change me, change all of us. Emma and Olivia aren't just financially secure now, they're thriving, blossoming in ways I couldn't have imagined. And he paused, searching for the right words. I found myself looking forward to coming home each day, not just to see my daughters, but to see you. To hear about your day, to share dinner conversations, to watch you teach Olivia piano, or help Emma with her art projects. Somewhere along the way, this arrangement became the most real thing in my life. Hope kindled in Eleanor's eyes. Even after learning about the investigation, about my suspicions regarding the accident, even after all of it, David confirmed. I was angry about the secrets, yes. Hurt that you didn't trust me with the full truth. But I understand why you held back, and I believe in what you are trying to accomplish. He moved closer still, his voice softening. And more than that, I believe in us, in this unexpected family we've created. I don't want to go back to our original arrangement, Eleanor. I want to move forward, together building something genuine from these complicated beginnings. Eleanor's composure finally broke, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I've been so afraid, she whispered. Afraid that once you knew everything, you'd see me differently. That you'd take the girls and leave, and I'd be alone again with empty rooms and meaningless success. Not going to happen, David assured her, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The girls would never forgive me, for one thing. Emma's already planning to ask if she can call you Mom on your birthday next month. She thinks it would make the perfect gift. Eleanor's breath caught. She told you that? While we were waiting for the x-ray today, said she'd been practicing saying it when no one could hear. He smiled at the memory. And Olivia's been working on a piano piece to surprise you, something about Sarah's favorite composer. Chopin, Eleanor whispered, fresh tears welling. Sarah loved Chopin. They love you, Eleanor, and so do I. The words came naturally, without premeditation or calculation. Simply the truth, finally acknowledged. Eleanor stared at him, wonder replacing uncertainty in her expression. You love me? I do, David confirmed, surprised by how right it felt to say it aloud. Not according to plan, and not without complications, but completely. For a moment, Eleanor seemed at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in her formidable career. Then she stepped into his arms, her response more eloquent than any verbal declaration. The kiss they shared on the moonlit porch was unlike their tentative first kiss. This was a kiss of commitment, of conscious choice, of a future deliberately embraced rather than accidentally stumbled into. When they finally separated, Eleanor kept her arms around his waist, unwilling to create even the smallest distance between them. I love you too, she said softly. I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. Too afraid of what I might lose if you ever discovered the whole truth. No more secrets, David said, not as an accusation, but as a promise. Whatever comes next, with Thomas, with Sarah's case, with the company, we face it together. That's what real partners do, bro. Eleanor nodded, resting her head against his chest. Together, she agreed. From inside the house came the faint sound of Emma calling for them. Without discussion, they moved as one to answer. their hands remaining linked as they went to tend to their daughter. Their daughter, the thought settled in David's mind with perfect rightness. Whatever unusual path had brought them to this moment, they were truly a family now, not through legal documents or practical arrangements, but through the bonds of chosen love and shared purpose that had grown stronger than any accident of birth or circumstance could have created. 2 years later, the Tudor-style house in Queen Anne was transformed by the sounds of celebration. Olivia, now 10, played a flawless rendition of Chopin's Raindrop Prelude on the grand piano while guests gathered in the garden where David and Eleanor had first exchanged their pragmatic vows. Emma, her sprained ankle long healed, danced among the guests with Fitzgerald and Gatsby, ribbons streaming from her dress as she twirled. At 8, she had blossomed into a confident, joyful child who called Eleanor Mom without hesitation, while still keeping a special place in her heart for the mother she had lost so young. Mrs. Patterson directed caterers with her usual efficiency, while Jake, now security director for Harrington Industries' newly expanded worker safety division, kept a watchful eye on the proceedings. Dr. Vivian Carter chatted with David's sister Jenny, who had traveled from Portland with her family for the occasion. Eleanor stood at the edge of the gathering, watching it all with quiet satisfaction. The past 2 years had brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Thomas Blackwood had eventually been charged with safety violations in connection with the Morrison development accidents. Though the investigation into Sarah's death remained ongoing, the evidence still circumstantial but growing. Harrington Industries had transformed under Eleanor's continued leadership, becoming an industry leader in workplace safety and ethical business practices. The Sarah Morrison Foundation had expanded its mission beyond scholarships to include comprehensive support for families affected by workplace injuries. And most significantly, the marriage that had begun as a business arrangement had deepened into a partnership of equals, a love story neither of them had expected, but both now cherished beyond measure. "Penny for your thoughts," David said, appearing at her side with 2 champagne glasses. He'd filled out since their first meeting, the gaunt stress of financial hardship replaced by the healthy solidity of a man in his prime. The construction consulting firm he'd started with Eleanor's encouragement had become successful in its own right, his expertise in safety protocols particularly valued in an industry finally taking worker protection seriously. "Just reflecting," Eleanor replied, accepting the champagne. "2 years ago today, we stood in this garden and made promises neither of us fully understood. Look at us now." David followed her gaze to their gathered family and friends. "Best business decision I ever made," he teased gently. Eleanor laughed, the sound free and unguarded in a way it never would have been when they first met. "Is that what you're going to tell them in your vow renewal speech? That marrying me was a sound business investment?" "Maybe," he replied with a grin. "Or maybe I'll tell them the truth, that I got the better end of the deal. A brilliant, compassionate wife who challenges me every day. 2 daughters who are growing into remarkable young women in a family built on choice rather than chance." Eleanor's expression softened. "I thought I was rescuing you and the girls that day in the coffee shop. I never imagined how much you would all rescue me." Before David could respond, Olivia called for their attention, announcing it was time for the ceremony to begin. As they moved to take their places beneath the rose arbor where Judge Morrison once again waited to officiate, David felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found his place in the world after years of struggle and loss. This time, when they spoke their vows, there were no careful negotiations, no business-like clauses, only the simple, powerful promises of 2 people who had learned that love could grow in the most unexpected circumstances, that family could be created through intention rather than biology, and that second chances sometimes arrive in forms no one could possibly anticipate. As Eleanor and David sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, Emma's voice rang out above the applause. "See, I told you they'd get mushy in public." The laughter that followed was the sound of healing completed, of a journey that had begun in desperation and calculation, but had transformed into something authentic and precious beyond measure. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the girls were asleep, Eleanor and David stood on the same back porch where they had first acknowledged their love 2 years before. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the world beyond their sanctuary. "I received a call from Detective Martinez today," Eleanor said quietly. "They found new evidence in Sarah's case, A witness has come forward, someone who saw Thomas driving away from the accident scene. David took her hand. After all this time? Why now? Apparently, they've been carrying the guilt for years. Thomas had threatened them, but now, with all the publicity around his safety violation case, Eleanor's voice caught. They might finally have enough to make an arrest. How do you feel? David asked gently, knowing how complex her emotions around Sarah's death remained. Eleanor considered the question carefully, relieved that the truth might finally be known, sad that it won't bring her back, but mostly grateful. Grateful. Sarah's final wish was for me to find you, to take care of you as you once took care of her. In honoring that wish, I found everything I never knew I was missing. Eleanor turned to face him, moonlight silvering her hair. If there's any justice in the universe, she knows that. She knows that her last act of love created ripples that transformed all our lives. David drew her close, understanding completely. She knows, he said with quiet certainty, and she's proud of the family you have built from the ashes of tragedy. As they stood together in the peaceful garden, the house behind them warm with the presence of sleeping children and loyal dogs, both felt the truth of his words. Their family hadn't come together in the traditional way, hadn't followed the expected path, but it was no less real, no less precious for having been deliberately chosen rather than accidentally found. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that family could be created through courage and commitment, that love could grow from the most pragmatic beginnings, and that sometimes the most unconventional choices led to the most beautiful destinations. Eleanor Harrington and David Reynolds had married for practical reasons, for security, for the well-being of children who needed stability. Neither had anticipated that their business arrangement would evolve into the most authentic relationship of their lives, a partnership founded on respect, strengthened through adversity, and ultimately transformed by a love neither had been looking for, but both had desperately needed. As they turned to go inside to the home they had created together, both carried the peaceful certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they now faced everything else. Together, as a family, bound not by obligation, but by the strongest ties of all, those we choose day after day to nurture and protect.